Hi, this is Steve with OS Nexus, and in this video we're going to go over the hardware integration features of QuantaStor 5. Hardware integration is really important because oftentimes you'll be managing systems that are going to be in colo locations or in data centers where you're going to need remote hands to go and replace bad media, to replace power supplies. And so it's really important that the software-defined storage platform that you're using can notify you when anything needs maintenance, whether it's hardware or software related. And so QuantaStor has built into it active hardware monitoring that's looking at everything from the system thermals to the RAM, health of the storage media, whether it's hard drives or SSD drives, the power supplies of the servers and the attached JBODs, the controllers that are interior to the system, such as the HBAs, and also being able to present to you the entire enclosure view of the system. This is what it looks like when you log into the UI and you go to the grid dashboard. QuantaStor goes and automatically detects the underlying hardware that you have, and it will determine what vendor and model of server and JBOD those are, and will automatically select that and configure itself based off of what it detects. But that detection logic isn't always 100%. There's some vendors that have motherboards and systems that are used with the same identifier for a whole cascade of different models. And so QuantaStor does its best guess. And that grid dashboard is a great place to start because you'll be able to go there and kind of see everything all at once. Another area you can go to see that same information displayed with a bit more detail is if you go to the main storage system tab and then choose the system information section. And if you scroll to the right, you're also going to see the information on the thermals, redundancy of the power supplies, and other information like that. Vendors that we have integrated with include Supermicro, Western Digital, Dell, HP, Cisco, Intel, Seagate, AIC, and Lenovo. So if the auto detection doesn't pick the right model, no worries. It's really easy to go in there and change that. And I'm going to give you a demo of that here in just a minute. So let's talk a little bit about the QuantaStor model for hardware integration. Each QuantaStor server is referred to as a storage system. And each storage system will have one or more controllers in it that are used to communicate with the storage media. In this case, this is one system with a single controller that has detected a single enclosure. So that could be an external enclosure like an external JBOD, or it could be an internal enclosure that's the front panel of that server, which might have 12 or 24 drive bays on it. QuantaStor associates what we call a layout, a server layout or an enclosure layout with each of those, both one for the system and one for each enclosure that gets detected. So here it has selected a Dell R740, and you'll see that bezel in the UI, and you'll also see a slot mapping and a drawing of the enclosure layout with each of the devices in it in the UI as well. If you go to the system that you want to modify, choose Modify Storage System, and in this section you'll see a vendor and then a server layouts, and you can go to the appropriate vendor for the hardware that you have and then choose a different layout to match exactly what you have deployed. And once you've selected the appropriate model, just click OK, and that's all there is to selecting the enclosure layout for a given server. Now we're going to go into what the controllers have detected that are attached to them. And so the controllers are oftentimes connected to an external JBOD, or just a bunch of disks, an external disk chassis. And so QuantaStor tries its best to, based off of the information it can gather from SCSI enclosure services and other APIs, it figures out what that model is. If it doesn't pick the right one, you can go into the UI and go to the section where it says hardware enclosures for the particular system, and then you'll choose a different one to match exactly the right hardware. And then this last bit here where it says cage or drawer layout, some enclosures have multiple drawers to them, and sometimes they'll have drive cages, sometimes on the front and back or internal. And so when you choose a particular model, it might give you the choice between multiple subsections, and then just click OK, and that part's done as well. So what we've gone through is how to set the storage system level layout for this, essentially the server layout, and then how to configure that at a per enclosure If you have 4 servers in your QuantaStor grid, you would just repeat that process for each of the servers. And again, it tries its best to auto-detect based off of the number of slots and the vendor model information that we gather, but it's good to double check this. Always good to double check that on a new deployment. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about what this looks like with a bit more complex configuration. So we're going to take an example where you've got a server that's connected to 2 external JBODs. In this case, we're using the Western Digital Data 60. When you go to that enclosure 1 on controller 1 and you assign it to tell it that it's the Data 60, it will automatically detect that that particular setting has been applied on that particular QuantaStor box. It will automatically apply those settings throughout the grid. As an example, here's 2 QuantaStor systems. They are in an HA cluster. So what you see in the rack is really what you see on the far right there with 2 servers and 2 JBODs. Although it looks like you have to do a lot of steps here, it's actually very few because the system does automate the rest of the work. Now that we've gone through the slides, let's go and look at a live configuration and reconfigure it to tell it that it's using a different model than what was auto-detected. In this case, we have a grid with 3 servers in it, and it's detected it as Supermicro servers, 2U24 bay servers. Click on the particular system, and it will bring up the storage system modify dialog. And let's say, for example, that this unit is actually a Dell 24 bay. We could just go in here and change this to a 2U24 Dell server and click OK, and it's going to go and adjust that. It's going to take a couple of seconds for the UI to redraw there. We'll change these all to be Dell 2U24s. Okay. One other thing I'd like to point out in the dialog for the storage system modify is this zero touch maintenance. We recommend you turn this on. What that does is if you have a drive go bad that you go and replace, you pull the bad drive, you put a new drive in, it will take the new drive and automatically mark it as a hot spare for you. So when you pull the bad drive, put the new drive in, it's going to start the automatic repair of the pool if it hasn't started already. So it's got a bunch of smarts built into the zero touch maintenance to make sure that it's using the right type of drive to repair the pool, an SSD drive of the appropriate size to repair an SSD pool. It'll use a hard drive of the appropriate size to repair a hard drive pool. We'll just choose that to adjust that to have auto maintenance enabled. Now let's take a look at it from a controller perspective. We adjusted the server layout to tell it that it's a Dell 2U24. Let's change now the enclosure view of this. And so here it sees all of these disk drives and it has detected an enclosure. And that enclosure happens to be the internal enclosure in the server. It could have been an external enclosure or internal. We're going to just change it as well. We changed the other part to Dell. We're going to change this one to tell it is also the Dell 2U24 internal server. So we just change it like that and click OK, and it's going to go and make that adjustment. And now you see the enclosure view for the Dell server and all 24 slots. You'll notice here that we have a scale out configuration, and it tells you exactly which OSD is in which slot. So you can correlate all the way from the underlying cluster or file system, the underlying pool of storage to the exact drive bay. And we show this inside of the scale out configuration as well. So if we go to the data and journal devices, we can see all of the chassis that are involved and where all the different drives are located. This one here looks like it's set wrong to a 20 bay server. Let's go in and find that and adjust it. So we're going to go to the other units and find where that was set. Okay, so it's this one. We're going to choose the enclosure. We're going to modify that enclosure and say, hey, this is a Dell 2U24. And that's it. And if the drive goes bad, you're going to see this change from a green to a red. You're also going to see the LED activate on that device. And you can also just right click on the device and say identify. And here we've selected the device. We're going to get it blinking. This is exactly what you would do if you needed to have somebody pull a device from a remote data center. You can see now that there's a little icon on the device indicating that the LED beacon is on. So you could take a screenshot of this to also help the remote or technician go in and replace the drive. They'll be able to find the bezel that looks like that. They'll be able to find the beaconed LED. So all of those things will really help them identify where the box is in the data center. Another thing that you can do is label each of these enclosures to match the label that you have in the rack. In the rack, if you have each enclosure with a particular tag on it, say that tag name is for this one, server DR1123 or something like that. Maybe you've got a tag as a sticker label that you've put on that unit. You can put that tag directly on that configuration here, and then it will show up in the UI that way. It takes a second for it to change, but now you can see that label, and you can then provide that also to the technician in the data center. So now it's that much easier to go and associate this drawing to exactly what's at your colo location. That's all I wanted to go over for today. If you have any questions, write us at info@osnexus.com. Thanks.